Hi, my name is Sebastian Rich and I'm a conflict and combat photographer. I work for all the major NGOs in the world, mainly for children's benefit. I am now collaborating with KEPYR, a brand new organization, and I'm very excited in the work they do, and please give them all your support.
Recording, and we are go. Sebastian Rich, how are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed. Nice to be on your show.
Thank you, thank you. This is our first time. It's the nameless show for now, but we are with KEPYR, Kids Entertainment Professionals for Young Refugees, and we are here to talk with Sebastian Rich. I'll give a quick, very brief overview of who you are for those who don't know your work. You are an award-winning combat photographer. You've traveled the world. You photographed and filmed every major global conflict in the world. You've worked for every major news outlet, from what I can tell, and for many, many humanitarian agencies. And you have recently published a book called Refugee. I have it right here. And it's an amazing book, and that's going to be the main focus of our chat. But let's start with who you are, how you got started. You told me this beautiful anecdote of why you became a photographer, and I'd love for you to share it with everyone.
I get asked this question quite a lot because people are very interested in my profession, and some people would like to do what I do. I'm an accidental photographer, or if you like, because when I was at school, which is like a million years ago, I was dyslexic, and dyslexia was not a thing then as it is now. And it wasn't understood, it just didn't exist. So I was just branded stupid and dumb and so forth. So eventually, after being in those days, corporal punishment, you could be hit around the head by a teacher and so forth. I got fed up with being hit around the head and got fed up with being called stupid and dumb. So I ran away from school at just about 15 years old. And I was always interested in photography, and started taking pictures. And I found that a way to tell stories rather than in the written word. I still have to, of course, write stories now and write captions, but I'm that much older, and dyslexics, we have tricks, to do stuff. So yeah, that's how I fell in. And of course, back in the day, I could go to a newspaper or, and say, I want to do this, and with no qualifications whatsoever. And they just say, okay, you cheeky bugger, you think you can do it? Go off and let's see your pictures when you come back. Nowadays, unfortunately, you have to have a master's degree in just about everything to get a foot in the door. So I was very lucky. But yeah, dyslexia got me doing what I'm doing now. So anyone who's watching who does have dyslexia and they think it's holding you back, it's not. It's a blessing. If you're going to be in the visual arts, dyslexia is a blessing.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that, because it helps you focus on other things, yeah. and you make up for those.
Yeah, we find ways.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now your bio online calls you a combat photographer. Taking photographs is one thing. How do you become a combat photographer? How did you get into that world?
But once again, by accident. My first combat, if you like, or taste of conflict was in Northern Ireland. The British and the Irish had been in conflict for decades and decades. And I arrived in Northern Ireland, not having done conflict. I was an assistant fashion photographer at the age of 16 or 17. And the very next morning, I think 26 bombs went off and shootings and so forth, just happened to be. And it was literally a baptism of fire. And I was straight in and recording and photographing and filming all this activity. And then after that, a major TV network in the UK saw my stuff and picked me up. And the next thing I knew, I was in the civil war in Nicaragua, the civil war in El Salvador, the civil war in Lebanon. And it just you become known. Someone employs you because they know you're going to get the pictures they want in a certain situation. Like, so if your plumbing in your sink goes down, you don't get a carpenter. So it's that. Sorry, terrible analogy, but once again, an accidental combat photographer. And I've worked an extensive amount with the United States Marine Corps in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and they trained me to be a medic as well. So yeah, that's how I didn't consciously become a combat photographer. It just kind of happened, like a lot of things in life do.
But it does take a combo of two very special talents, right? You have to have that photographer eye, but you also have to have that ability to keep a cool head and look for the, I don't want to say beautiful shot, but for the right shot, for the best shot in that situation.
Yeah.
I mean,
in that scenario, you have to have the ability. I mean, some would call it sheer stupidity, because if say a car bomb goes off or you get ambushed, everyone's running away from it and I'm running into it. But yeah, you have to have the ability to, I mean, a very simple thing, if you like. During the Bosnian conflict, mainly in Sarajevo, I think 73 photographers, either photographers, cameramen, journalists in general, were killed in that nearly 4.5 year war. And a lot of them were young, very young photographers, because Sarajevo was only 2 hours flying time from, say, England. So a lot of people thought, well, this is the time I'm going to be try myself as a war photographer. And one of the things that catches out someone who wants to be a war photographer or finds himself in a combat zone is not knowing the difference between incoming fire and outgoing fire, right? I mean, it sounds crazy, but it can save your life if you do the right thing when one or the other happens. And also, if you come under direct fire in an ambush, which I have done on, unfortunately, a good few occasions, when everyone else is lying in the dirt, you have to be, it's no good that you are lying in the dirt with them either, because you're not going to get any pictures. So a friend of mine took a picture of me once with, I've got a bunch of Marines lying on the ground under fire. And then there's this dumbass here who's standing up taking pictures, So but you don't consciously, it's not bravery. It's just, it's something clicks in and you have to get the picture.
Yeah. Wow. And how did you go from actual war zones into, what sparked your interest into the refugee crisis? Because it seems a lot of your work covers refugees. Your book Refugee obviously portrays refugees. When did that happen?
Well, the war and refugees obviously go completely glove in hand. So as I'm still very much a combat photographer and a humanitarian photographer, but obviously in a role as a combat photographer, I came across refugees in every single war zone, from El Salvador to Syria, Afghanistan, and it was just a natural progression. I met United Nations, UNHCR, UNICEF, and so forth, and we started collaborating many years ago. But what I hadn't done as a combat photographer is I hadn't actually sat down and documented their stories. So that took my attention greatly, because I suddenly realized that there's absolutely no difference between refugees and you and I. They're just people who've lost everything in an instant, right? Absolutely everything. And I've been striving very hard. I mean, it sounds very grand, but I've been striving very hard to photograph and document refugees dignified and proud, because a war can take away, they can kill your husband, they can kill your children, or they can take all your belongings away, you blow up your house. But all the refugees I've ever interviewed, there's one thing that's left, and that's their dignity. So I try and photograph them dignified. Right. It's too easy to photograph a refugee scrabbling around in the dirt trying to find wood and stuff. And there is something to be said to be photographing the need, so the donations come in. But I tend to leave, I do some of that, of course, it depends on what campaign, what requirements are. But I do try and photograph refugees, how they want, for instance, with women refugees. I mean, this is the front cover of the picture of the book is in South Sudan. And this was a few years ago now. And I hit on this thing where instead of me just going into the tent or the shelter and just photographing them, is asking the women how they want to be photographed. Right? So it empowered them a little, because I found a lot of the women, when they left their houses, you know, the clothes on the back and holding on to the children, they always had a little bit of makeup or a little bit of something. So when I asked them, especially this woman, when I asked her how she wanted to be photographed, she vanished for about a minute and a half and came back with, you know, what one shawl that she'd taken that she was very proud of. And you can see by that photograph, she's proud and she's dignified. So yeah, that's what I've more or less been doing ever since.
That's amazing. It's amazing to me personally, because I felt that looking at the pictures. You know, I was obviously there's some heartbreaking imagery in there, but most of it is so empowering, because if you see these people and you hear their stories, and you know, working with KEPYR, you know, I'm familiar with some of the stories, and then you see these people and kids especially beaming, smiling, or you know, and being positive. You just look at that, and I mean, I'm literally getting goosebumps right now just thinking of it and talking about it, because it's, how can you ever be upset about anything in your life, you know? And it's just so, it gives you such strength personally to see how strong they are, you know, and that makes me want to help them even more, you know, because they're so not just needing of help, but deserving of help, you know. I mean, these are people who've gone through hell and back, and they need our help, you know? Speaking of their stories, why don't we go, you say it here in the book. Let me read on the first page. It's been my utmost privilege to document the lives of these wonderful people escaping from conflicts and brutal wars around the world. More often than not, their stories are terrifying beyond comprehension. I've made firm friends, grieved with them and for them. Refugees are the same as you and I. Their stories, I'd love to hear some of the stories of the people in the book. And I said this to you earlier when we set up for the interview. It was very hard to pick images that you know, a particular one to talk about, because really you want to hear the story of each and every one. And I encourage people to get the book and see for themselves. But there's one. Let me find it. There's one on page 24. I'll show it to you as a reference. It's a group of kids, right? And it struck out to me, page 24, it's in South Sudan, group of kids. And it just struck me because these are the kids that, you know, when we work with KEPYR, that we're trying to help. And I would love to hear a first-person account of what they're like, what it was like meeting them, what was the situation there, how did you meet them, and what are they like?
Well, in most refugee camps, excuse me, and especially on the continent of Africa, the refugee children probably haven't seen a white man, right? And they certainly haven't seen a white man covered in tattoos, right? So what happens is that I get, when I'm going around photographing whatever I'm photographing, I pick up a little, I like this being like Pied Piper, I pick up a little gang that follows me around. And every now and again, I'll get a little, someone will touch my arm because they want to know what the tattoos are. They don't really, you know, the tattoos have always been a bonus in refugee camps, especially with children, because it breaks the ice for them. They've got something to look at and touch. But also, you know, a white guy, their parents on the whole don't have hair on their arms, so they're intrigued. White guy, tattooed white guy with hairy arms. So we have this thing. So I think on that particular day, I spent the whole day with this little gang following me around. And in the end, through the translator, I said, all right, I want to try and set up a nice group photograph. But that fell apart instantly, because as you can see by the picture, they're all doing all sorts of things, right? So in the end, I gave up completely, and I just
they're kids.
Yeah, great. And I just said through the translator, look, do what you like, jump up and down. And, you know, we just had a ball for about half an hour. I took maybe 50 pictures. But I particularly like that one because every child is doing something different and not in that usual post-school photograph. But going back to your thing of children in war zones and refugee camps, children in an active war zone is very different from children in a refugee camp. You'll find on the whole, children in a refugee camp are having an absolute ball because the normal rules of school and being at home don't apply. That they can go nuts, they can go crazy and have a wild time with their friends. In an active war zone, it's very, very different. You see a very different child, traumatized child. But in a refugee camp, on the whole, they're having a lot. I think you see in the book there's pictures from another camp in South Sudan with kids jumping into a pool.
A river, yeah.
Opposite page, there's Afghan children doing exactly the same thing in a refugee camp in Pakistan. But every now and again, in a quiet moment, there's a child, who'll be there, and you can see a sadness in their eyes. I mean, going back to the tattoo thing, there was sometimes I get stopped in my tracks by things children say, and there was this one little girl who'd been following me around doggedly all day, touching my arms, and she was saying something all the time. And after about 2 hours of this, I turned to the translator and said, "What's she saying? What is she saying?" And he said, "Oh, Sebastian, don't worry about it. It's just child things. It's not important." And of course, that made me slightly angry. I said, "Well, it is important, and I want to know what she's saying." So he asked her again, and she replied, and he translated back to me. She's saying the refugee camp here where we live is so dirty. Can I take the butterflies off your arm and put them in my pocket so the wings stay clean? Right? Oh, and just, and I mean, nearly to tears, because, through the pace of the day, getting the required pictures and so forth, and this little voice in the wilderness tells me this, and it just slayed me.
I bet. Wow. It's amazing that when you go there, you don't just document. You're not on the sidelines just taking pictures. You really make that human connection, it seems. And,
I mean, much to the
way beyond that
time of UNICEF and UNHCR press officers, where they've got a schedule to keep to and curfews that we have to abide by. But if I just went in and took photographs and didn't play football, didn't sit down and do drawings, I wouldn't want to do my job, and I've had many a row with NGO drivers and security details saying, we have to go, we have to hurry up. I said, well, not until we finish this drawing, dude.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so important to those kids and people there as well. Just like, all right, job done, see you. How does it work? How do you go, like, walk us through one of the trips? Like, how does it, what's the protection like? Who do you travel with? How many camps do you hit? Like, how does it, it's, for us.
It depends entirely on the assignment. If it's in an active war zone, like take Afghanistan and so forth, and I'm working for UNICEF, we will have quite a big security detail and a security brief on the region, who's fighting who, what, and where, and how, and a brief overview of the political situation at that time. You kind of dread the security briefings, but they're actually very good because having worked a lot with the military, you know how things change from day to day, minute to minute. So it is a good thing having a security brief. And once that's done, we'd normally leave the next afternoon in a UN convoy. Sometimes that can be a bit much for me because I feel I'm more a target in a big white vehicle with blue UN on the sides. And then usually when we get to the camp, I ask for the vehicles to stay out of sight and as few people as possible from whatever organization to be with me. Obviously, I need the translator, I need the press officer, the comms officer from that organization. And depending on what, if it's for a campaign, we're after, for say, clean water or vaccinations, we have a certain idea of imagery that we want and we go and get that imagery. But as I mean, I don't just get those images, because when you're walking through a refugee camp, I mean, the whole place is just full of pictures. So there's, you know, I'm always got the camera up to my eyes. But you document, especially the Syrian conflict, because don't forget, I don't just take the pictures, I sit down and document their stories. And sometimes you get to an overload, because especially with the Syrian conflict with ISIS, there's a certain type of brutality that is so raw and visceral and disgusting, that I've heard so many stories that I can't repeat here because I can't. But you get to a point where you mustn't be inured to it. It can't not affect you, but it mustn't affect you to the point where you can't do your job. So it's a real mental balance. You know, you feel like this, because once a refugee, say for a mother who's literally had their baby cut in half by a machete by a member of ISIS in front of her, child hung upside down, the baby cut in half, and she's telling you this, and you mustn't cry, you mustn't give sympathy, you must give empathy, but at the same time, she's chosen that moment to get it out of her system, right? So you have to be, you're the caretaker of her mental well-being in those few minutes. So you mustn't be distracted and think to yourself, well, I've heard this a million times before. Sometimes it gets the stories, you know, I feel like this sort of strange confession that, you know, and it builds up and sometimes explodes, and yeah, that's a whole another ball game.
How do you deal with it coming home? Where do you find the balance?
Sometimes I do find the balance, sometimes I don't. It's you know, I have to get on with a normal life, and I think one of the things is that I often, especially with the children, I photograph them, and I very rarely ever see them ever again in my life. So when I was actually putting this book together, there is like this little girl here who is in floods of tears because she just escaped from Syria with her mother across into Jordan, in floods of tears because she lost her mother for a few minutes. And I think, I wonder where she is now. And that happens to just about every picture in this book of a child. I think, I mean, where's that little boy in Syria now? You know, he's playing that, but where is he now? Is he still alive?
There was one particular, as you speak about that, there was one that stood out for me, and it is one of the more sad ones. Where I was just like, I have to ask him about that. I have to ask what's going on there with that little girl.
Particularly sad. She had fled the fighting with her parents from their village, which I think was about 2 or 3 days away from that refugees. So, well, then in Sudan, it's called a POC, Protection of Civilian Site. And she had turned up at the camp, not with her parents, but with another adult. And she was, I'd never seen a child quite so distraught. So, I mean, just screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming. And then so traumatized that everything just shut down. And you can see in that picture, she's completely and utterly given up. You know, I mean, you could have stuck needles in this child and she wouldn't have even noticed. And I, you know, as a father, the natural instinct is to hold, to cuddle, to make sure. But I just knew that this wasn't the time to hold her. She had to have this time just to be. I mean, the women in the picture you can see, they did actually comfort her, and after about an hour and so forth, she came round, but still incredibly sad. But I remember every single tear, every single sound from that picture.
Yeah, it must be hard that you can't do more.
I know it sounds strange that I didn't want to give the child a cuddle, but it was just it she was so traumatized that I think it would have added to her confusion, you know, a big white guy suddenly holding her. You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to ask you about your hardest assignment, but it sounds like there's tough moments in every assignment, right? There isn't, or is there one that stands out where you're like, this was by far the hardest physically and emotionally assignment?
Well,
that I've ever done?
I think that the hardest have been is when stupidly I've been shot 3 times. And kidnapped once and mock executed once. So those on a personal, physical and mental level were very, very difficult to deal with. But it's also very difficult dealing with refugee stories. And for me, I have a big cynical chip on my shoulder because I've been doing this for a long time and I've seen very little change. Not in individual projects or missions or, but overall globally. We now have 80 million refugees, half of them children. Right? How did this happen? So I think, sometimes I think, well, I get a bit, as a young photographer, I like to think that my photographs would change a politician's mind and so forth, and something would happen because someone had seen this picture. But now it's, I still do it with the same passion, but there's a certain amount of cynicism about what change it will bring. And I'm encouraged when if I'm in a sort of UNICEF funded hospital in, say, a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. So now I try and focus on individuals or families because the bigger picture now is it's like a spider's web of, I don't know. I can't get a grip with the bigger picture now. Maybe I used to 30 years ago, but now I can't.
No, it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. I feel the same way with the little efforts we do at KEPYR, where if you look at the numbers, it's just overwhelming, and you might as well give up. And then you know that each of those numbers represents an individual, and that if anything you can do to make that individual's life a little bit better, it's worth it. And I think your photographs, especially in all your work, you're reminding people. You keep reminding people that this is a real crisis, that this is out there, because the politicians don't, right? They sweep it under the carpet. There's no money in it for them, so why bother?
But I also have to tread a very fine line, you see, because one of the, I made a smaller book about 6 months ago called Conflict. It was just about combat photography. And what I did is I restricted myself to just choosing 20 images, just 20, because I could have filled the book. Like this book here has got 130 odd pictures, and I could have filled the conflict book with the same amount of pictures of blood, guts, gore, and the most horrible pictures. But I tended to show like 20 images that, there were a couple of dead bodies in it, but the most of them were emotions in the eyes. And people, not grenades being thrown or gun or a couple, but just to show emotions in the faces on how the war was affecting them. Sorry, I digress a bit. I've kind of gone off track. Sorry.
No, not at all. No, not at all. I mentioned your work and how it reminds people. So it's good that people know that there's refugee. There's the current book, right? But then there's also others. You said there's conflict.
It's just called Conflict, and as I say, it's 20 of images that, as a photographer who's been doing this for so long, there's very few images that make me go, oh, so I did that. I looked at, when I was editing for those 20 images, I was like, okay, this is not the work of Sebastian Rich. This is the work of another photographer. What photographs? So it's got a couple of images from the Salvadorian Civil War, Afghanistan, Syria, right up to date, but there are only 20.
Yeah, I mean, it actually reminds me. There is another picture I wanted to hear the story about. I mean, we might as well make this a series, right, and just go through every picture.
I'm just going to open up a can of soda water, so bear with me.
Absolutely.
Now, okay, hang on. Sorry about that.
Not at
Good
all.
job. Okay, Harry, sorry.
No, I was just joking that you know, we could make this a series and just go through the whole book and tell the story of every picture. I think they're all fascinating. But there's another one that stood out for me, probably because I have children, so they're siblings, and there's this one. I assume they're siblings, but I wanted to wait. Am I holding
Yeah.
I assume.
That's brother and sister.
Yeah.
Brother and sister from Myanmar, Burma.
Right.
And they're in a refugee camp in Thailand. I don't actually know why the little boy was in floods of tears, but the big sister was being the big sister. She was, you know, just making sure, although I don't speak the language, but just, you know, as a dad, you know, I could see what she was doing, and it was just a very cute picture. But I mean, 5 minutes later, that little boy's up and running and playing football. But you know, it was just a picture of sibling love, you know, of taking care of each other.
Yeah, sweet, very sweet. Yeah, it certainly touched me. It's you mentioned earlier that these kids actually also do have fun in these camps, which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the biggest challenges you feel? Like, because you're there, you're the boots on the ground. What are the biggest challenges in these camps?
The biggest challenge is from children will have fun in a playground in the Bronx or a playground in London, and they certainly have a lot of fun in a refugee camp because there's just so much trouble they can get into, right? The biggest challenge for children is education in a camp, and you know, a lot of, especially a country like Syria, which had, you know, is a very, very high literacy rate, right? So the education stopped instantly, and you know, rekindling that education is a challenge for UNICEF, for UNHCR, anybody. So yeah, that's what I would regard as the biggest challenge. Secondly, for a parent, is keeping children healthy, because refugee camps are notoriously the most unhealthy places you can imagine.
Yeah.
So education, health are probably the biggest challenges. And at the moment, we have COVID-19.
I was going to ask you about that. Have you been traveling since the outbreak?
I haven't been to refugee camps since the COVID-19, but I've been in contact with colleagues in the KEPYR camp, which is on the border of Somalia and Kenya, which I was there a few months ago. I mean, an absolute frigging nightmare, because social distancing, forget it. You know, it's just not going to happen. So just, you know, you're a refugee, you've lost everything, you're worried about your children, you're worried about everything, and then all of a sudden we have this as well, you know, so unimaginable.
Yeah. What are the things that you've seen that we can do to help kids, to help these kids, to help refugee children? The things that really you feel, because you've seen the impact of these things, right? We can do everything we can on our end, but
I've seen the impact by the smallest things. You know, I've been in a refugee camp that's got a makeshift classroom, and I have torn bits of papers out of my notebook and given to children, and snapped pencils in half that I've got in my camera bag. It's little things like notebooks, pencils, pens, rulers, all those sort of things that you don't really think of, but it just makes, you know, education just a little bit easier. I mean, some camps, you know, have lots, you know, because there've been a campaign for, you know, to get orders of pens and pencils. But there's a lot of places that still don't have those basic things, like notebooks, satchels. UNICEF have been very good, you know, worldwide by getting school requisites to children. But there's still a lot of places that don't have those very basic things.
Yeah, UNICEF has been our main, our only really organization that KEPYR has been collecting for, raising funds for, because we know they go to the right places and they know what to do with them. You know. But
there's still lots. I mean, I have very vivid memories of makeshift schools in Somalia. I mean, these are not schools inside refugee camps, because sometimes you have refugees who live in the host communities. So there's a school there. I mean, there's not in this book, but I have in my archives. There's children attending a class sitting on car tires, you know, bits of engine blocks, blocks of wood. There's no chairs, right? I mean, children are easily distracted anyway. So if they're not comfortable, it just compounds the problem. So it's the things that we all take for granted: chairs, pens and paper.
Yeah. It's interesting because when when KEPYR does a fundraiser, one of our, in our mailings and the way we approach people is always any amount helps. $10 is enough. And it's to entice people that to give, because it's if everybody that gives a little, everybody gets a lot. But what you're saying really underlines that, because if $10 can buy a couple of soccer balls or 100 pencils for a classroom, it really does make a difference, it seems.
Yeah, it's those little things you see. Like you can leave the big stuff like vaccines and sanitation and all to UNICEF and UNHCR, but it's the little things. I mean, in Rwanda, for instance, I put down the cameras and say, right, let's play football, and I suddenly realised that the football they had was made out of rags and elastic bands and plastic bags. They'd wrapped it all up. All they ever wanted was a football. So it's just stuff that kids play with.
Right.
Football, baseball bats, whatever. Just one of the biggest problems in refugee camps also is boredom. Right. I mean, not so much for the children but for the adults is boredom, because their life has been put on hold.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I have to be aware of, is that when I come into town, if you like, I'm the only show in town, right? So all eyes are on me, my cameras and so forth. So I have to be a diplomat, which is difficult. And I have to be aware that what I do and say is going to be talked about all the way around the camp for weeks.
Yeah. There's probably legends about you there. Somebody, I saw a white man with tattoos, and they're like, it's like the Yeti or something for them. That's not true. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite or a picture that really stands out to you that you'd love to share the story of, specifically from the recent book, from Refugee?
People do ask me that, and I get that there are so many. I'm just flicking through as we're talking. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to find something that's okay. I mean, it's not the most dramatic of pictures, but there's two pictures here of a girl in South Sudan doing her homework, and Syrian refugees I think they're probably in Iran, but they're both using solar powered lights. Okay. And this brought the children so much happiness, because it's a continuation of the education, because they get given homework, but if they've got no electricity in the tents at night, they can't do their homework. So, I think it was a combination of UNICEF. I think it was UNICEF in Syria, and it was UNHCR in South Sudan. They had a Brighter Lives campaign, and just to see the happiness and concentration on those children's faces, being able to do their homework, was just wonderful. I know it's not the most dramatic story, but it was just, for me, it was just wonderful to see them really concentrating, forgetting about me, the photographer in the room. They were really getting on with their homework.
Yeah, and again, it shows how these things that we take for granted are luxuries for some people, and donating money to organizations and so forth really does help. You share a little bit, and they actually get something back that makes their life better. There was one picture that also a little out of context, but I just realized there was a huge tornado in the background.
That's in Zaatari camp. It's a camp for Syrian refugees only in Jordan.
Yeah, there it is.
And I mean, that was just by chance I got that picture. It's and for me, it summed up a refugee's life. I mean, you've lost everything. You're in a refugee camp. You've got very little water. You've got practically nothing. And on top of that, the weather on that day is not your friend, right? I think there's a picture in here as well of a registration center that's caught in a sandstorm. I think it's in this book. If you find it, it's oh my gosh, or was it in Book of Conflict?
Yeah, I think I saw one with a sandstorm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I
Here
mean,
it
that,
is.
you know,
Here it is.
the
Dust
Syrian
storm,
refugee-
Syrian refugee registration, Jordan. Yeah. There it is.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, you know, there's a great amount of sadness about, you know, becoming a refugee, and you're registering to, you know, be officially designated as a refugee, and in the middle of it, you have this sandstorm that's wipes through the tent.
Well, I show you one of my favorites, and is it the last page? It's almost the last page. Page 121. This was one of my favorites.
Yeah. There's brother and sister again. Big
I mean,
sister.
yes,
Little brother.
there's a theme here. She is just so full of love and happiness and peace, and it's just inspiring. Like, it's, again, if somebody, you know, who has to use you know, a bucket as a chair, obviously not in a good situation, can be that happy and proud, how can we not be, you know?
Exactly. I mean, it's a child's faith in good. You know, it's the children always manage to see the good in just about everything somehow. And people always say to me, because we were doing it was a campaign for clean water for UNHCR. And people say to me, oh, you set that up, you know, because the UNHCR is written on the, you know, on the bucket. And no, that was there. Like, very rarely, sometimes you do for specific campaigns, but and she was just so happy, you know. She saw the camera come around on her, and this smile just erupted, you know, and her arms got tighter around her little brother. You know, it was just a wonderful moment. Yeah, I mean, there's so many lovely moments and so many sad moments.
What gives you the most joy about your work?
Joy is a strange word to use for my work.
Right.
I think it's hope. It's hope, once again, that the pictures actually do some good. And in the past, you know, I think maybe 3 times in my life, I've known that a set of pictures or a picture has actually changed someone's life or has made someone do something about that person's situation. So the joy comes from the hope, and the joy comes from knowing that someone has done something for a child.
Is there, how have you changed over the years? What's the person, you already spoke about that in the beginning, you were, you know, optimistic that you're going to change the world with your pictures. And I'm sure you have certain people's worlds changed with your pictures. Still, overall, what's the life lesson, not life lesson, but I mean, it's, you're in a situation that none of us, you know, like you said earlier, you go to countries that everybody runs away from. They're literally refugees. They're literally trying to get out of it, and you go in there. How has that changed you as a person? How your outlook on life? Is there?
Yeah, it's sometimes I despair that we as human beings. I mean, you know, human beings have been fighting wars and killing each other, you know, since we, you know, walked upright. We don't seem as a species to learn our lessons that well. So as a person, it's made me cynical to quite a big degree, but I despair of adults half the time, right? But so most of the time, or not if all of the time. So if I'm in a refugee camp and I'm with children, that for me, in a selfish way, it gives me hope that one day, you know, the children in the future will actually put a stop to all this. There's still hope for the future, be it through children, but not in the existing. Yeah, maybe not the next generation, but the generation after may learn. You know.
Yeah. I feel like that just looking, you know, watching CNN. I'm like, all right, they're all old white men. Well, you know, they don't have that much time left to destroy the planet, and hopefully the next generation it'll get a little.
Well, we've had, you see, I was having this conversation earlier. You see, I wish I wish there were more presidents and prime ministers like Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, who's just been elected for her second term. I mean, she's just a good, decent human being. And I just don't see why there aren't more people in power like her.
Money. In America, it's money. You know, not to get too political, but it always, if there's no money behind it, there's no.
You do not want to hear my views on the current administration in the United States, I can assure you.
I'm sure they're very similar to ours. I also love, it's interesting to learn that, you know, KEPYR, because our whole organization is because we all are working in the kids media space, right? We're writers, directors, animators in kids entertainment, and that's what spurred us, right? We're like, you know, we're telling these stories, and every script you write, you try to put a little message in there, a little something that'll give a kid a little nudge or a little empowerment. And here are these kids who don't have televisions, who don't have tablets, who don't have devices to see stuff, and they need these messages and concrete help more than anyone, you know. And that's really what spurred us to say, hey, there's a whole group of us, we can get together and maybe make a little difference. And it seems like we have that in common, that, you know, that focus on children.
There's also a refugee apathy at the moment, because there are so many, you know, 80 million. And, you know, people are, you know, with COVID-19 on top of everything, people are worried about their child's health, their mortgage, their car payments and so forth. And, you know, the numbers of refugees are so big that they can't get to grips with it. And it's not that they don't care. It's just that they can't, you know, how can I help? How can I help this massive, you know, amount of refugees? It's difficult, and I get it, I understand. But what people mustn't forget, as you say, the $1, the $5, the $10, right? It does make a difference. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, what you're saying empowers even our work, because we get frustrated sometimes. We're like, oh, all this effort and we do so little, but knowing that it really does land in the right places, and getting that first person account is quite.
But also what hasn't helped with a few administrations around the world is that the word refugee now has also become synonymous with terrorism, right? I mean, I've seen this change around in the last 10 years, you know, where refugees had all our sympathy, all our love for what's happened to them. And now there's a suspicion, you know, with refugees, for instance, fleeing from, you know, crossing the English Channel they've managed to get to France somehow from Syria. Lord alone knows how. And then they're crossing the Channel in these boats that are leaking. And now, not only the British Coast Guard, but, you know, the Italian Coast Guard, the French Coast Guard are not, you know, not taking them on board. They're pushing them towards the country because they don't want to have anything to do with them. You know, and that's dreadful. You know, that shouldn't be happening. Sorry, that's probably getting a bit too political, but
no, it's absolutely, you're right.
But refugees are now kind of synonymous with, I don't know, terrorists and the unwanted.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. But yeah, you know, people can make a change. So if anybody's watching this, you know, they can give to UNICEF directly, or they can go, they can give through KEPYR. And follow our fundraisers, and your work has certainly helped KEPYR a lot, because your images and your generosity to let us use your images in, you know, in our fundraisers and trying to get people's attention is invaluable. I mean, it's, you know, how else are we going to get through to people?
Doing what we're doing now, and you using those pictures is what I hope for, right? Is I hope, because organizations like yours will show the pictures around and get things going. So, you know, that's great. My work is done.
Right. There you go. All right. Time for a point. Speaking of your work, I know you recently had a photo exhibit of women in NATO in Belgium that you couldn't attend. What else is coming up? What are the plans for the future?
Well, I had a magnificent exhibition in NATO in the most wonderful space, and I couldn't attend because of COVID-19, which was slightly bizarre. The next story I'm doing is a little complicated, and it's taking some setting up. Is that in Mexico, the big drug cartels are acting like NGOs at the moment. during COVID-19. They're taking food and materials and clothing to rural villages like UNICEF or UNHCR would do, right? But obviously they have a reason for doing this, because, you know, if the police come to try and, you know, arrest, you know, cartel bosses and so forth, the locals are going to rise up and say, no, you know, they're doing good work. But it's very weird that the drug cartels are acting like NGOs at the moment. So I've made initial contacts with another colleague of mine. He's going to be making the video, and I'm going to be shooting the stills on. You know, we're getting embedded, if you like, with one of the major drug cartels in Mexico, and we're going to see where this adventure takes us.
Wow, that's, yeah. Of course you are. Of course you're going in there. That's where nobody wants to be in the world. It's like, how do you find Sebastian Rich? You just go to wherever nobody else wants to be, and you're probably there with a camera.
Yeah, well, it is kind of like that, but it's you know, that there's stories out there that people, you know, that still, there is something that that's irked me just in the last couple of weeks. I try and post daily on Instagram, just to keep awareness going of people, you know, mainly refugees situation around the world. And I posted a picture about 2 weeks ago of a very, very emaciated child being held up by a doctor, a naked rear view of what the final stages of malnutrition are like. And I got this, I never react to comments on Instagram because I don't want to get involved with trolls or whatever. But I got this message saying, how dare you put this picture? I don't want to see these pictures over my breakfast. Thank you very much. You know, and I think it's the only time I've ever reacted back, and I can't repeat what I said in that. Sometimes I get shocked where, you know, people. The internet has been a wonderful thing in some respects, but it also makes you aware that there are some deeply unpleasant people out there as well. For sure,
yeah, and it empowers them to say whatever they feel like because it's from the safety of
the home. Which and it's the first time it happened. Normally you get you know, people saying, how can I? The big one is, how can I help? What can I do? You know, I say, well, donate to Red Cross or whatever it is you do. And then people say, how can I volunteer? And I said, well, you join the UN Volunteers Program and so forth. And that was the first time I'd had such a comment, and it deeply saddened me for that. And it's still, thinking about it now, I just think, how can someone say that about, you know, a child who's 2 days away from dying? I just like, yeah, anyway.
It is, it's people are, you know, people are selfish. You know, I think it's one thing our species lacks is compassion. You know, I mean, a lot of people have compassion, but an inherent, deep, profound compassion for each other. I mean, it's, you know, for many it ends with the picket fence. You know,
yeah, we seem to have lost a lot of that down the line. We've gone from we to I very quickly, and I think that's just a thing of survival. You know, it's. But yeah, that's a conversation for a bottle of Jack Daniel.
There you go. Yeah. Next time, yes. Well, here actually for you, it's 10 in the evening right now, or 8.
Yeah, exactly.
Here it's like 9 in the morning. Yeah, we need to get together.
No, I'm on water at the moment. Just so
yeah, I know. Me too.
Down.
Well, listen, the book Refugee. Where can people get it?
Well, you can get it on Amazon.com. Not Amazon USA or Amazon UK, but Amazon.com.
Okay.
And if you go to, here's the sales pitch. I thoroughly recommend this product. If you go to my website on the homepage, www.sebastianrichphotography.com, and on there the homepage is that picture and the reverse picture, and it will give you a link to Amazon.com directly to the book. And also, there's another link there where you can preview the first 15 pages. So you can make up your mind whether you want to buy this or not. But the proceeds are from this book are going to a little refugee shelter that doesn't get a lot of help here in Cyprus, because our little island here, we do have a big intake of refugees from all around the world. And they're overcrowded and COVID and so forth. So all the proceeds, it is quite an expensive book. I think it's about $80, I think. But because like all color photographic books, or photographic books in general, are very expensive to reproduce. So unfortunately, there's only about $5 profit with every book that's sold. So we actually need to sell a lot.
Well, you know, it's over 100 pages, so it's less than $1 a page. And considering you've dedicated your life and risked your life to get every single one of these images, I think the price is quite.
I'm a bit upset that it is so expensive. I did try and do deals with you know, the people who made the book and so forth, but and I'm aware that, you know, economies and people are losing their jobs all around the world because of COVID-19. So it kind of, you know, I mean, I've got a few messages from people saying, I love the look of this book. I've seen the first 16 pages, but I've got to wait. I'm going to be buying it with my next, I don't know what you call it in the States, but we call it social welfare money. Right. You know, they get a check. And I say, oh, please, don't spend $80 on this book out of your welfare check. You know, just use that $80 to feed your kids, you know, please. You know, look after yourself first. And if you've got some money left over, then maybe just give that bit of money to the local, you know, UNICEF office, but you know, don't buy the book, don't feed, and not feed your children.
That's a great way to end, Sebastian. Don't buy the book.
You know, I know, and it's just something that's
happened
about times. People love the book, but they've said, you know, I've got to wait for the next welfare check, and I just like, and then I feel really bad, you know, and because I'm not in the position to give away free books, because it's you know, they're reproduced somewhere in the States, and I don't have control, you know, over the pricing. So
that's fine. Speaking of the book, one last story.
That's one of my favorite pictures. I mean, apart from, yeah, I mean, if you've noticed, the front cover is color and the back cover is color, but everything in the black and white. This is just such a mass of outrageous color that I couldn't shoot it in black and white. And if you look very closely, this is on the border with Pakistan and Afghanistan, and these are returnees. These are families that have been in Pakistan for possibly 30 years, refugees from Afghanistan. And these little girls didn't know they've never been to Afghanistan. Their parents had taken them back for the first time. So I just saw this riot of color on the border. So I knelt down to take this picture. And while I was taking the picture, I suddenly noticed this little baby in the hammock.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't notice when I was, you know, when I initially saw the picture, it was just two cute little girls sitting on this colorful truck. And then I noticed their little brother in the hammock underneath. So it's a picture that never, ever fails not to make me smile. You know, it's a photographer's dream. I mean, you know, look at the smiles, the position of the hands. I mean, it's just, I hate to use the phrase, it's just too cute.
It is too cute. Nothing wrong with, you know, kids also being cute and being kids. That's part
but also, I mean, just before you go, I mean, the telling, I mean, I think it's one of the last pictures in the book. I mean, this is on the Iranian-Afghan border. You know, the best place in the world is home.
Right.
You know, it's the perfect ending to the book for me. Anyway, couldn't be more graphic.
So these girls in the back cover picture, the color one, they were actually coming home. So they were refugees and they were in a camp or those girls, and now they were coming home.
Those girls were born in Pakistan. Their parents fled Afghanistan from one of the many wars in Afghanistan some 30 years ago, right? Yeah. So, but the parents decided, and the conflict is nowhere near finished in Afghanistan, but the parents decided that they wanted to return, and given the risks as well, because the political situation for refugees in Pakistan has not been great recently. You know, Pakistan is hosted just about, I think, most of the Afghan refugees. So the authorities were making life difficult for the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. So a lot of refugees decided to return home. So those two little girls, they'd only ever heard about Afghanistan, their home, and they were going back for the first time and were very, very excited. And once again, I have no idea what's happened to these. I often wonder, about the little one here in the hammock and the two girls. Are they still smiling? Are they still alive? Are they getting an education? Well, I know the girls aren't getting an education in Afghanistan, and that's another whole ball of wax.
It's just so rare to speak to somebody who has been to so many of these places and has such great insight and is willing to share it. Thank you, sir, so much for all your work and everything you're doing. And this was really enjoyable. I love this. Enjoy your evening. Regards to your family. Sorry we kept you away from them for a while.
It's all right. And yours.